Alma's hands were trembling, but it wasn't from fear. It was the steam, thick and swirling in the marble-tiled bathroom of a penthouse she had no business being in. The mirror had fogged up completely, the scent of eucalyptus soap clinging to the air. She wasn't supposed to be here, yet. She had arrived early, hoping to finish her shift quickly before catching the last subway home. The building supervisor said the owner wouldn't be home until late, like always. But the moment Alma stepped onto the slick shower platform to wipe down the chrome fixtures, her foot slid, her balance vanished, and in one breathless moment, she crashed backward into the open glass door. The towel she had tucked into her waistband slipped loose. The neckline of her loose uniform shirt tore open on impact, exposing pale skin as she landed hard against the warm, wet floor. She gasped, winded, her hair soaked, her chest rising in sharp rhythm. She scrambled to cover herself with a nearby towel, heart pounding. And that was when he stepped in. Julian Reese. He was supposed to be in Boston. That was what the schedule said. That was what the staff always assumed. But here he was, standing in the doorway of the bathroom in a black cashmere coat, his eyes narrowing the second they landed on her soaked, trembling form. His face didn't twist in anger or shock. There was only stillness, quiet, calculating stillness. Alma's voice caught, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Her words crumbled as she sat up on her elbows, pulling the towel to her chest. Julian moved forward without saying a word. He crouched beside her, his coat dampening at the hem, and extended a hand. His fingers were warm, dry, steady. She hesitated, then took it. Her body tensed when he helped her sit up. He didn't linger on her bare shoulder, the exposed curve of her waist. He simply met her eyes, expression unreadable, and said softly, "You hit your head?" "No, just surprised." He nodded once, then rose to his full height. His presence was staggering, like gravity made human. She'd seen photos of him, the elusive billionaire, the man who built Reese Designs from nothing after his family's company collapsed years ago. But nothing had prepared her for the weight of his silence, or the way it made her forget she was half naked on his floor. She scrambled to her feet, backing away, cheeks burning. "I'll leave. I'm sorry." This was a mistake. He didn't move to stop her, but he didn't look away either. Instead, he said the one sentence that made her pause at the door. "I swear I didn't mean to see you like that. But now I can't forget what I saw." Alma turned, eyes wide. Julian looked at her like he wasn't sure if he was annoyed, intrigued, or both. But behind that stillness, she caught something else, something flickering and unspoken. She gripped the doorknob, trying to calm her breath. She was just a maid, a girl from the Bronx with no experience in this kind of world, and he was the kind of man who broke rules simply by existing. Nothing could ever happen. Nothing should. But in that bathroom, with steam curling between them and the echo of her breath lingering in the air, something already had. Alma Velázquez didn't grow up dreaming of penthouses and designer floors. She grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, where she shared a pull-out couch with her younger brother. Her mother worked double shifts as a home nurse until arthritis in both hands forced her to stop. Alma was 19 when she dropped out of community college to pick up 3 part-time jobs, cleaning houses by day and working a late-night diner shift just to keep the lights on. At 22, she was exhausted but still standing. The cleaning job at this luxury building was supposed to be temporary, just a little extra cash to pay for her mother's medication and maybe help her brother apply to trade school. But from the moment she stepped into the penthouse on the 40th floor, she knew nothing in her world had prepared her for it. The place was glass and stone and silence, like a modern castle floating above the city. Everything was white, black, or chrome. No clutter, no warmth, no evidence that anyone actually lived there. She had only seen the owner once from afar when he exited the building in a sharp suit, sunglasses on, driver, waiting. He hadn't noticed her. Why would he? She was just the maid, Julian Reese, however, was known to almost everyone else. Tech magazines called him a design visionary. The press called him one of the most eligible bachelors in New York. Internally, his board of directors called him obsessive, genius, and impossible to please. To Alma, he was just a name on the work order. She hadn't expected to ever be in the same room as him, much less the same bathroom, much less dripping wet and trying to shield herself from his gaze. After that day, nothing went back to normal. He didn't mention it, didn't reprimand her, didn't file a complaint. But he was there more often, always, unexpectedly. He'd be reading on the terrace when she came to water the plants, or on a call in the kitchen when she was emptying the dishwasher. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then she noticed the subtle changes. His schedule shifted. His returns to the penthouse became unpredictable, almost deliberately so. Still, he never spoke more than a few words. He never asked her name. But he watched her, not in a leering way, not in a possessive way, but like she confused him. Like she was a puzzle he didn't know he wanted to solve. Alma, for her part, tried to keep her head down. She needed the job. The agency paid her under the table, no questions asked, and any mistake could mean being replaced. But being in that space with him, feeling the air hum every time he walked into a room, made it harder and harder to pretend she was invisible. At night, in the quiet of her apartment, she thought about his eyes. Not just how they looked at her that day in the shower, but how they hadn't looked away. He could have told her to get out, could have mocked her or fired her, but he didn't. He helped her up. He touched her carefully, gently, like he wasn't used to touching anyone anymore. She wondered what kind of life he had, all alone up there in that perfect penthouse. No photos on the walls, no clutter, no noise, just lines and control. It was beautiful and terrifying, the way money could make something feel more like a museum than a home. She told herself to forget the moment. She told herself to focus on her family, her bills, her future. But memory is a stubborn thing, and Julian Reese, with his quiet stare and unreadable expression, wasn't something easily erased. Days turned into weeks, and still, neither of them brought it up. Still, he lingered when she entered a room. Still, she checked her reflection twice before ringing the doorbell. Neither one said it aloud, but the air between them was changing, and neither knew yet that they shared more than a moment in the steam. They shared a past neither of them could see coming. The next time Alma saw Julian, he was already home when she arrived. She stepped into the penthouse cautiously, clutching the cleaning supplies to her chest, her breath catching when she spotted him in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water. He didn't look surprised. If anything, it seemed like he had been waiting. "You're early," he said without looking up. "Or you're late," she replied before she could stop herself. His lips twitched, just slightly, like he was amused. He turned to face her, the glass in his hand catching the light from the window. "Which would you prefer?" She blinked. "I didn't think it mattered." "Most things don't," he said simply, then walked away. The tension started there, in the small, sharp exchanges that sounded harmless but felt like sparks. Alma tried to stay professional, but every moment near him felt like walking along a wire strung between propriety and something else she couldn't name. He didn't flirt. He didn't joke. But he noticed everything. When she accidentally dropped a glass, he didn't scold her. He just handed her a towel and asked if her hands were steady. When she rearranged a vase on the coffee table, he moved it back silently, but only after she left the room. Once he caught her humming under her breath while she wiped the windows. He didn't say anything, just stood behind her, watching. She only realized he was there when she turned around and almost bumped into him. "You have a good voice," he said softly, "for someone who never speaks." Alma's cheeks flushed. "Maybe I don't have much to say." "Maybe," he replied, his gaze steady. or maybe no one's asked the right questions. That day, he didn't leave the room. He sat at the bar counter while she dusted the living room, not saying much, just watching. She felt his presence like heat, like pressure. And still, nothing crossed the line. He never touched her again, not once. But she started noticing other things, like how his shoulders tensed when his phone buzzed, how he stared out the windows for long minutes as if searching for something he couldn't name. She began to wonder if he was lonely, not the kind of lonely that came from being single, but the kind that came from being untouchable. She wasn't sure when her curiosity turned into something warmer, something heavier. Maybe it was the night she caught him sitting on the edge of his balcony at 1 a.m, drink in hand, staring into the dark. Maybe it was the day she saw the scar on his wrist when he rolled up his sleeves. Or maybe it was when he looked at her like she was the only person in the room who wasn't trying to take something from him. The distance between them began to shrink, slowly, carefully. They began to speak more. Alma told him about her mother's failing health, about her brother trying to find a job, about how she hated cleaning mirrors because they always reminded her how tired she looked. Julian told her about building his company from scratch, about the lawsuits, the betrayals, the nights he couldn't sleep. He never mentioned his parents, never talked about what came before. But she could see the weight in his silence. One night he asked her if she'd ever been in love. She laughed, short and bitter. "You have to be chosen for that," she said, "and I've never been anyone's first choice." He didn't respond for a long moment. Then he said, "Some people don't need to be chosen, some people are just seen." Alma didn't know how to answer that, so she changed the subject. The next week she was reassigned to another unit while her usual coworker returned from leave. Alma didn't see Julian for 10 days. She thought the spell would break, that whatever fragile thread had existed between them would snap with time and distance. But it didn't. On the 11th day, she got a call from her supervisor asking her to cover a shift back at the penthouse. Alma said yes before she could think. When she entered the penthouse, it was like nothing had changed, except everything had. Julian was there, waiting. "You came back," he said, not as a statement, not as an accusation, but as something else. "Relief, maybe." She nodded. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to." He tilted his head. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I'm just the help." "You're not just anything," he said, and then he stepped forward, slow and deliberate. He reached for her hand, not to pull her close, not to seduce, but just to touch. "I haven't felt anything real in a long time," he said, "and that scares the hell out of me." Alma's heart pounded. She didn't move. He didn't kiss her. He just held her hand like it was the most fragile thing he'd ever held. That night, she stayed longer than usual. They sat on the couch in silence, listening to the city outside the glass walls. She told him about her dreams, the ones she buried to survive. He told her about the silence that followed his success, the empty victories. Nothing happened physically, but everything changed. The line between them had thinned to a breath, and neither of them was ready to say what they knew was already happening. That something had started, that something might not stop. Julian began noticing the small things first, the way Alma folded the dish towel twice before hanging it, the way she always tapped the edge of the counter twice when thinking, the way she smiled, rarely and quietly, as if smiling too openly would give away too much of herself. He didn't ask for explanations, but he paid attention. He noticed how she avoided eye contact when she was nervous, how she bit the inside of her cheek when she was angry but didn't want to show it, how she spoke softly, even when she was certain. It wasn't affection that unnerved him, it was how natural it began to feel to have her there. One evening, the sky over Manhattan was streaked with red and gold. Alma was wiping down the windows in the main room when she glanced over her shoulder and saw Julian watching her again. "What?" she asked, eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't flinch. "You don't look like you belong here," he said. Her body stiffened. "I know." He shook his head. "That wasn't an insult. It's a compliment. You don't look like this place has swallowed you." She didn't answer. He stood from the armchair, walked toward her, and stopped just close enough to make the air between them stretch thin. "I've watched this apartment eat people alive," he said. "You come in with who you are, and then the silence, the view, the money it makes you forget. But not you. You still carry something." "It's just cleaning spray," she joked quietly. "Don't flatter me." "It's something else," he said. "Something honest." That evening, Julian invited her to stay for tea. She accepted. They sat by the floor-to-ceiling window. No touching. Just stories. She told him about growing up in the Bronx, how her mother always said, "One quiet girl can keep a whole family together." How Alma always wanted to go to school for art, but could never afford to draw more than rent receipts. He listened without interrupting. Then he spoke. "My family had money once," he said. "Reese Group wasn't always mine. It was my father's, until it wasn't." He told her about the man who'd once been his father's business partner. A charming, dangerous man who undercut his father's deals, tricked him into signing away control, then left their family bankrupt. His father died 2 years later. Julian was only 18. "I built this from the wreckage," he said. "Every brick, every contract, every win. I swore no one would ever take anything from me again." Alma listened, frozen. The name he didn't say hung unspoken in the air. Because she knew it. She'd seen it once on an old letter her mother kept in a drawer she never opened. She asked quietly, "What was his name?" Julian looked at her. "Luis Medina." Her breath hitched. He's my father." Silence. It was like the city outside the glass vanished. Julian's face didn't change at first. Then something behind his eyes dimmed. Not anger, not hatred. Something colder. "You're his daughter?" She nodded. "I didn't know. I swear. My mother never talked about him. She said he was dead to us." Julian took a step back. Alma stood quickly. "I only realized when you talked about your father, the company, the timing. And when I saw that old photo in your office, I knew. I recognized him. I didn't know what to do." Julian turned away. "You knew enough to stay quiet." "I didn't stay quiet to hide it. I stayed quiet because I didn't want it to matter." "It matters," he said, voice low. "You think I can forget what he did? What he cost me?" "I'm not him." "But you're his." The words landed sharp. Alma stepped back, stung. "So that's it?" she asked. "It doesn't matter what I've done, what I've been, just the name I didn't choose?" He didn't answer. She grabbed her coat. "I shouldn't have come back." She walked out before the silence crushed her. That night, Julian didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, trying to convince himself she had played him, that it was some long game, that she was sent by fate to remind him that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, but he knew better. He remembered her flinching when he reached too close, her hands shaking when she thought he was angry, her voice cracking when she said she had never been chosen. The next morning, Alma didn't show up. Not the next day, either, or the next. The penthouse felt hollow. He hated how much quieter it had become. He didn't call. He didn't send anyone. But 3 days later, he walked into his office and opened the drawer that held the old photo, the one of his father and Luis Medina. They were young in it, smiling, partners, before betrayal. He stared at the man who ruined his family. Then he looked at Alma's handwriting on the service form she had filled out the first day she arrived. Her letters curved inward, neat and small, like she didn't want to take up space. He called his assistant. "Find me," the address she put down. 20 minutes later, he was standing on a street in the Bronx, facing a 3-story walk-up. He knocked on the apartment door. A younger boy answered. "She's not home," he said. "She's working the night shift at the diner." Julian nodded. Tell her I left something in the quiet." The boy looked confused. Julian turned and walked away. That night, Alma found a small envelope tucked under her pillow. Inside was a note. It said only, "I see you. Not your father. Not your name. Just you. Come back when you're ready." The next evening, she knocked on the penthouse door. Julian opened it himself. He didn't speak. She stepped in, dropped her bag, and walked straight into his arms. He held her like she was the first solid thing in years. She whispered into his chest, "I don't want to fix your past, but I want to be part of your future." Julian kissed the top of her head. "That's all I ever wanted." They didn't need forgiveness that night. They just needed each other. No legacy, no guilt, just the fragile peace of two people who chose to stay. That night changed everything, not because something extraordinary happened, but because something simple finally did. Alma didn't come back as a maid. She came back as herself, not because he begged, not because he offered her a role to fill, but because she chose to. And Julian, for the first time in years, didn't try to fix, control, or define what she meant to him. He let her be. The shift was subtle, but real. She didn't move in, she didn't stop working, but she stayed longer after her shifts, sometimes curled on the couch with a book, sometimes sketching in the corners of old design plans he'd left out. Julian began to leave her blank notebooks, good paper, expensive pens. He never said it aloud. She never asked. One evening, she found a note in the back of a sketch pad. "Draw the world you want, not the one you come from." She taped it to the inside of her locker. In the penthouse, their physical closeness remained unspoken, restrained, but charged. Julian's hand brushing hers as they passed in the kitchen felt like electricity. Alma's laugh, rare and surprised, always made him freeze as if afraid the moment might end. The tension between them built slowly, one heartbeat at a time. But the rest of the world didn't wait. One night, Julian hosted a private event for a new investor. Alma wasn't supposed to be there. She only stopped by to drop off a book he'd left at her apartment. But the elevator opened, and suddenly she was face to face with a room of suits and stilettos. Eyes turned, some in curiosity, others in judgment. One woman approached her with a cruel kind of smile. "You must be the help," she said sweetly. "Or something more interesting?" Alma didn't respond. She didn't have to. Julian's voice cut through the crowd. "She's exactly who she wants to be," he said, "and she's not here for any of you." He walked to her side, took the book from her hand, and said, "Thank you. I needed this." She smiled quietly. "I know." That night, he didn't walk away from her. He walked away from the crowd. Alma followed. In the elevator, they stood side by side. He turned to her slowly. "I'm tired of pretending you're not the best part of my day." She didn't answer right away. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't either," he admitted. "But I know what I want." "And what's that?" He looked at her like the question was too small. "You, just you." They stood in silence as the elevator reached the top. She stepped out, but he didn't follow. "You're not coming?" she asked. "If I go in there with you, I won't let you leave," he said, voice low. "Not tonight, not ever." Her breath caught. "Then maybe you should." Julian stepped out slowly, closing the door behind him. In the dim hallway light, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I want to be clear," he said. "This isn't about desire. It's not about what happened in that bathroom or what didn't happen after. This is about trust. I want to be close to you because I trust you, because I want you to trust me." Alma stared at him. Her heart was pounding. "I've never done this," she said softly. "I know." He stepped closer. "That's why I want to do this right." She led him inside. There were no grand gestures, no music, no performance, just soft lighting and two people standing very still in the quiet. She reached for his collar, not to pull him closer, but to feel the warmth of his skin beneath the fabric. He cupped her cheek. When their lips finally met, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't frantic. It was patient, reverent, like they were learning each other's language one breath at a time. Julian didn't undress her quickly. He didn't rush through the moment. He touched her as if he was asking, not taking. Her shirt slid off her shoulder slowly. She stood before him, exposed, vulnerable, her chest rising with the weight of what she was about to give. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said, "but only if you promise you won't run when it gets hard." He smiled softly. "Running from you is the only thing I've never been able to do." When he lay her down, he wasn't the powerful CEO. He was a man holding something sacred, and when she wrapped her arms around him, she wasn't the girl from the Bronx anymore. She was just Alma, and she was his. They moved slowly, learning with each touch, with each sound, with each gasp that escaped between whispered names. Afterward, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. He traced slow circles on her back. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the rhythm of something new, something alive. In the hours that followed, neither of them said what it meant. But they both knew. This wasn't just physical. This was surrender. This was the moment they chose not to go back, and neither of them wanted to. The following morning was quiet, almost too quiet. Alma woke first, the sunlight painting soft golden lines across the crisp bed sheets. She lay still for a moment, listening to Julian's steady breath beside her. His arm was wrapped around her waist, possessive in sleep, but gentle. He looked younger like this, softer, less like the untouchable man she first feared and more like someone learning to be real again. She slid out of bed carefully, pulling on one of his shirts that hung loose on her frame. She padded barefoot into the kitchen, still half dreaming, and began making coffee, her hands steady in a way they hadn't been in months. When Julian appeared minutes later, shirtless and still sleepy, she smiled at him without thinking. He stepped up behind her, kissed the top of her shoulder and whispered, "I could get used to this." And she believed him. For the first time in years, Alma allowed herself to hope, but hope is fragile, and the world has a cruel way of testing anything that dares to grow too quietly. That afternoon, Alma received a phone call. Her younger brother Mateo had been involved in an altercation outside his part-time job. A man had tried to steal from the store, and Mateo stepped in to help. In the scuffle, he'd been injured and taken to the hospital. It wasn't life-threatening, but the bills were already climbing. Alma dropped everything. Julian offered his driver, his card, even to come with her, but she refused. "This is my family," she said. "I need to handle it myself." He watched her walk away, jaw tense, eyes unreadable. Alma returned to her old world like stepping back into a skin she thought she'd outgrown. Her mother's apartment was still too small, the fridge still too empty, the pain still too loud. She didn't call Julian. She couldn't. She wasn't ashamed of her life, but she feared what it might do to what they'd just started building. The hospital bills were already stacking up, and Alma went back to working long shifts at the diner, picking up overnight cleaning contracts again. Every time she saw Julian's name light up on her phone, she let it ring. Not because she didn't want to talk to him, but because she didn't know how to explain that love didn't fix rent, that desire didn't erase debt. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th day, Julian appeared outside the diner. He didn't come in. He just waited. When her shift ended at 2 in the morning, she stepped outside and froze. He was leaning against the wall, suit jacket slung over his shoulder, hair slightly mussed from the wind. "You didn't call," he said. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I didn't want you to see this part of me." "I've already seen all of you," he replied. "The good, the scared, the proud. This is no different." "It is," she said. "This part is messy, and I don't want to be something you feel obligated to fix." "I'm not here to fix you." He stepped closer. "I'm here because I miss you." Her breath caught. "I thought you'd disappear." "I almost did," he admitted. "Not because I stopped caring, but because I thought maybe you needed space to remember who you are without me." "And I did," she said. "I needed to stand up for myself again, for my family, to make sure that the woman you're falling for isn't someone you have to carry." "I don't want to carry you," he said. "I want to walk beside you." That night, he walked her home. They didn't hold hands. They didn't kiss. They just talked. About nothing. About everything. Alma returned to the penthouse the next weekend, but not as a cleaner. Julian had cleared a space for her in the study, filled with art supplies, books, and one small note taped to the wall. "Build something new." She began sketching again, quietly, slowly. Julian gave her the room, and the time. They didn't talk about forever. They didn't plan, but they stayed. Together. One night, weeks later, as they stood on the rooftop of his building, looking out over the city that had broken them both in different ways, Alma said, "I used to think love was something you earned, something you had to be worthy of. Now I think maybe it's something you learn to accept." Julian looked at her, eyes soft. "And I used to think it was something you survived, but now I think it's something that saves you." She leaned into him. "Not saves, reveals." He kissed her forehead. "Then thank you for revealing me." There was no dramatic twist, no last-minute disaster, just two people choosing to stay in a world that made it easier to run. And somehow that choice was the most dramatic thing of all. Some stories end with fireworks, others with tragedy. But for Alma and Julian, it ended with something quieter, something rarer, a beginning. 6 months had passed since that first night, the night that changed everything without even meaning to. The city was the same. The skyline still glittered like promise and pressure wrapped in glass. But their world had changed. Alma no longer cleaned the penthouse. She didn't need to. Julian had offered her more than once to stop working altogether, but she refused. Instead, she began selling her art small sketches that captured stillness, honesty, and quiet strength. She rented a tiny gallery space near the East Village, painting in the early hours before the world woke up. He bought the first piece without telling her. When she saw it hanging in his office behind the main desk, she cried. They didn't move in together. Not yet. They took things slowly, respecting the fragile thread that had once held them together. But she stayed over often. Some nights she left toothbrushes and sweaters and scribbled ideas on his kitchen notepad. And some mornings, he would wake up to find her asleep on the couch with a sketchbook balanced on her chest. Their lives didn't become perfect. Julian still had board meetings and crises and people clawing at the edges of his empire. Alma still had overdue bills, her mother's recovery, her brother's growing pains, but now they faced it all together, and the most powerful shift of all? They let each other in. One evening, as they stood on the penthouse balcony, arms around each other, Julian whispered, "You were supposed to be a mistake." Alma smiled. "And you were supposed to be untouchable." He kissed her temple. "But now you're the only thing I want to hold on to." She turned to face him, her fingers curling into the collar of his shirt. "Then promise me one thing." "Anything. When the world tries to make us forget this is real, remind me." He rested his forehead against hers. "I won't need to. You are the most real thing I've ever known." They stayed there for a long time, wrapped in the sound of the city breathing below them, and somewhere between silence and sunrise, between vulnerability and strength, between the girl who once slipped in a billionaire's shower and the man who once swore he'd never fall, they found something stronger than desire. They found love that chose them exactly as they were, because sometimes the most unexpected fall is the one that finally teaches you how to stand.